She was wrongfully fired and was crying at the bus stop when a man in a suit approached her. No one imagined that encounter would change not only her life, but thousands of other people's lives. What you about to hear is a true story that happened in New York City and proves that sometimes the worst tragedies in our lives are just the beginning of something extraordinary. This is the story of how a simple janitor became a symbol of social justice in the United States. And it all started with the worst day of her life. Sarah Johnson arrived early that Monday morning at the Horizonte Corporate Center in Manhattan, just as she had for more than a decade. The glass and steel building was still almost empty, with only the night security guards finishing their shift. She greeted Mike, the doorman, with that genuine smile that lit up the lobby every day. "Good morning, Sarah. Another day at work," Mike said, granting her access to the elevators. "Good morning, Mike. You know how it is. Work doesn't wait for anyone," she replied, adjusting the cleaning cart she knew like the back of her hand. Sarah went up to the 18th floor, where the executive offices were located. It had been her area of responsibility for years. Enormous rooms with windows that showed all of Manhattan waking up below. She always started with the CFO's office, Henry Coleman, an imposing room with a mahogany desk that cost more than her entire year's salary. While dusting the furniture, Sarah noticed there were documents scattered on top of the desk. This wasn't normal. Henry always left everything organized before leaving. She carefully gathered the papers without reading anything, just organizing them as she always did. It was her job to keep everything clean and tidy. How strange, she thought. I've never seen him leave the office this disorganized. Sarah continued her meticulous routine. She cleaned the executive bathrooms, vacuumed the Persian rugs, organized the legal bookshelves. 3 hours later, when business hours began to bring life to the building, she went down to have coffee in the employee cafeteria. That's when she heard the first conversation that made her world collapse. Someone broke into the CFO's office during the night. Carol from reception whispered to other employees. Important documents went missing. Multi-million-dollar contracts. Management is desperate. Sarah's heart raced. She had been in that office, had touched those papers, but only to organize them, as she always did. She felt a chill in her stomach, a bad feeling she couldn't explain. They've already called a security company to review the cameras, Carol continued. Whoever did this is going to be in big trouble. Sarah finished her coffee quickly and went back to work. She tried to focus on her tasks, but couldn't get the conversation she had heard out of her head. She felt that something terrible was about to happen. The intercom rang on the 18th floor. It was for her. Sarah, you need to come down to human resources right now. It's urgent. Did something happen? She asked, but the line had already been cut. The elevator had never taken so long to go down. Each floor seemed like an eternity. Sarah felt her hands sweating, her heart beating too fast. When she reached the 12th floor, she saw Marcus, the HR manager, waiting for her with an expression she had never seen before. "Sit here, Sarah," he said, pointing to a chair in front of his desk. The room was colder than usual, or maybe it was just her perception. Marcus opened a folder and took out some photos. They were images from the security cameras. Sarah saw herself on the screen, entering the CFO's office, handling the papers on top of the desk. "Sarah, can you explain to me what you were doing with these documents?" The question hit like lightning. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. "I was just organizing, Marcus, like I always do. The papers were scattered. I gathered everything and left it organized on the desk. It's my job." "Sarah, these documents contained information about $50 million contracts. Contracts that are now in the hands of our competition. How do you explain that?" The words came out of his mouth like stabs. Sarah couldn't understand what was happening. She felt like she was living a nightmare. "Marcus, I don't understand anything about contracts. I can't even read those things. I just cleaned the office like I've been doing for years." "Sarah, you were the only person who had access to those documents before they disappeared. The cameras don't lie." The injustice of that accusation hurt more than any physical pain she had ever felt. Sarah had worked her entire life with honesty, raised her children with dignity. She had never taken anything that wasn't hers. "Sarah, the company cannot keep an employee under suspicion of leaking confidential information. You are fired for cause." The words echoed in the room like thunder. Fired for a cause. This meant Sarah would have no rights, no unemployment insurance, no severance, nothing. After years of honest work, she was being treated like a criminal. "Marcus, for God's sake, I didn't do any of this. I have a family to support. Please, review the cameras properly. The investigations show you were the only one with access to the documents. The decision has been made." Sarah felt tears running down her face, but tried to maintain her composure. She didn't want to give whoever was committing this injustice against her the satisfaction of seeing her broken. "You have 15 minutes to collect your things and leave the building." In the locker room, Sarah opened her small locker. Few things: a spare blouse, some medicines, a photo of her children that always motivated her on difficult days. Other cleaning staff were there, but no one approached. The fear of being associated with someone accused of theft was greater than years of camaraderie. The walk through the hallways was the longest of her life. Employees stopped to look. Some whispered, others looked away in shame. In the lobby, Mike, the doorman who had greeted her that morning, couldn't look her in the eyes. On the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, Sarah stopped and looked back. The Horizonte corporate center rose imposingly against Manhattan's sky. For everyone inside, Sarah no longer existed. The bus stop was a few meters away. Sarah walked slowly, feeling the weight of the plastic bag and the much heavier weight of injustice. She sat on the cold bench and let the tears fall freely. How am I going to explain this to my children? She thought. Emma, 9 years old, who needed expensive medicines for asthma, and Jason, 7 years old, who was excited to start at a new school. Who's going to hire me after being fired for a cause? At that moment, a man in a suit stopped in front of her. Sarah didn't look up, thinking he was just waiting for the bus, but she noticed he wasn't moving away. "Excuse me, ma'am," a gentle voice said. "Is everything okay?" Sarah raised her face and saw a well-dressed man with a genuinely concerned expression. He had that manner of someone accustomed to responsibilities, but his eyes showed genuine kindness. "Yes, thank you," Sarah lied, quickly wiping away her tears. Edward Martinez observed the scene carefully. He saw the plastic bag, the red eyes from crying so much, the posture of someone who had just received life's hardest blow. "Look, sorry for intruding," he said, sitting next to her. "But I have a daughter, and if she were in a difficult situation, I'd want someone to at least ask if she needed help." Sarah looked at this stranger willing to sit next to her, when not even her own coworkers had the courage to defend her. "You're very kind, but it's not something I can solve with anyone's help." Edward noticed the company badge still partially visible in the plastic bag. He knew that company well. "Did you work at Horizonte Corporate?" "I worked," Sarah replied, lowering her head. "Until this morning, they accused me of something I didn't do," she finally said. "They fired me for cause." Edward perceived the pain in her voice. There was something in the way she spoke that conveyed absolute honesty. "What kind of accusation?" "They said I took important documents, that I passed information to competitors. Sir, I work in cleaning. I can't even read those contract things properly." Edward paid attention to every word. His experience as a businessman had taught him to identify when someone was lying. And this woman definitely wasn't making up stories. "Did you organize some papers on some executive's desk?" Sarah opened her eyes, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen similar situations. Someone steals important information, and the most vulnerable person ends up taking the blame. For the first time since morning, Sarah felt someone was believing her. "Do you have family?" "I have 2 small children. They depend only on me." Sarah held the photo tightly. "And now, how am I going to support them?" Edward felt indignation growing inside him. "Are you absolutely sure you did nothing wrong?" Sarah looked directly into his eyes. "I swear on my children's lives that I did nothing but organize those papers. What's your name?" Sarah. Sarah Johnson. Sarah, my name is Edward Martinez. I have a company here in the city, and I can guarantee you one thing. If you really innocent, this injustice won't stay like this. Edward couldn't concentrate on anything else that day. Sitting in his office at Martinez Consulting, he looked out the window without really seeing Manhattan beyond. His mind was focused on discovering the truth about Sarah Johnson. Marcus, his private attorney, arrived in the late afternoon with a folder and a serious expression. Edward, you won't believe what I discovered, he said. I confirmed the woman exists. Sarah Johnson worked there for more than a decade, always had a clean record. But I found out who really had access to that office. Who else? Besides Sarah, at least 6 different people entered that office in the days before the disappearance. Executives, assistants, IT staff. But here's the problem. I got a source inside the company. The documents weren't stolen by chance. Edward's heart raced. Who? Richard Alonso, executive assistant to the CFO himself. He had complete access to contracts, knew the value of each document, and he'd been selling information for months. Edward slammed his fist on the desk. That bastard let an innocent woman take the blame. Worse than that, Richard knew Sarah's routine. He purposefully left the documents scattered, knowing she would organize them, so the cameras would show her handling the papers. Do we have proof? Marcus smiled. Messages exchanged with competing companies, bank transfers, everything documented. The next day, Edward and Marcus presented themselves at Horizonte Corporate Center with all the evidence. In the 20th floor conference room, Henry Coleman, the CFO, was seated with other directors. And there, in a chair beside them, was Richard Alonso. Gentlemen, thank you for coming, Henry said. We understand you have information about irregularities. Edward shook his hand, looking directly into his eyes. We have evidence that will surprise all of you. Marcus distributed copies of the documents. What you're seeing is evidence of a leak scheme that's been happening for months. Henry began reading, his expression changing rapidly. These are our internal contracts. How did you get this? The same way your competition got them, Edward replied. Through someone who has privileged access. Richard cleared his throat nervously. Who are you, gentlemen? Why are you making these accusations? Edward turned to him slowly. We are the people who discovered that you let an innocent woman take the blame for your acts. Marcus placed more documents on the table. Screenshots of messages between Richard Alonso and Sterling competition representatives. Bank transfer receipts, access records, outside business hours. Henry picked up the receipts. The amounts were too high to ignore. Richard, can you explain these transfers? This must be some mistake, Richard stammered. Edward stood up. You knew Sarah's routine perfectly. You knew she always organized scattered papers. The night before the supposed theft, you purposely left the documents scattered. That doesn't make sense. Richard tried to argue, but desperation was evident. It makes perfect sense, Marcus continued. You had already photographed the contracts days before. When they discovered the leak, you were the one who suggested checking the cameras. Henry slammed his hand on the table. Richard, is this true? Silence. Richard looked at his own hands. I was having financial problems. Sterling offered a lot of money. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. But you let Sarah take the blame. Edward exploded. A woman with small children. You're fired, Henry said. And we're taking all legal measures. Gentlemen, Edward said. Now we need to talk about Sarah Johnson. She needs to be immediately reinstated with public apologies and fair compensation. You're right, Henry admitted. We committed a grave injustice. 3 days later, Edward called Sarah with the good news. Her innocence was proven. Richard had confessed. But Edward had a bigger proposal. Sarah, would you like to work at my company? Work with you? But I'm a janitor, Sarah. You have something more valuable than any degree. Character. I'm offering a position coordinating social programs to help people in situations similar to yours. Are you offering me a better job? I'm offering an opportunity for you to use your experience to help other people. The salary would be 3 times higher with complete health insurance. Sarah began to cry. Can I think about it for a few days? Of course. But Sarah, this offer isn't charity. It's recognition of someone who showed strength in an impossible situation. 2 years later, Sarah stood in front of the Sarah Johnson Institute of Social Justice, rising in the heart of Manhattan. Her story had inspired the creation of a national movement that had already helped hundreds of families who were victims of injustice. What began as the worst day of her life became the beginning of something extraordinary. And all because of a stranger at a bus stop who decided that doing the right thing was more important than moving on. Sarah's story teaches us that sometimes our greatest tragedies are just the prologue to our greatest victories. That a simple act of compassion can transform not just one life, but hundreds of others. And that justice, even when it arrives late, still exists when courageous people decide to make a difference. If this story touched your heart, leave a like so it reaches more people. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that prove good always wins. And in the comments, tell me, what city or country are you watching from? Your message can inspire other people around the world. Because, in the end, we can all be someone's Edward Martinez. The question is, will you be ready when that opportunity appears?